Kaylin threw the jacket into the flames like it was nothing, and I felt my heart explode in a way I couldn't breathe through. Alara screamed, reaching out, her tiny hand catching fire, and I lunged across the patio, grabbing her before the blaze could do more damage. Heat licked my arms, fear gripped my chest, and in that second, I realized my entire family could be monsters. Years of giving, of silently funding their luxuries, had led to this, humiliation and betrayal staring me straight in the face. If you're enjoying this, please subscribe and share. Your support keeps the stories coming. Alara's sobs pierced the air as I pulled her away, wrapping her in my arms while everyone else laughed or looked away. My mother's lips twitched in what I could only call a smirk, and Kaylin, he acted like he hadn't just set my daughter on fire over a gift she spent 6 months creating. 6 months of painting, stitching, patching, dreaming, all tossed into their so-called perfect night, all because he thought he could show off in front of his entitled friends. I could feel the fury building in my chest, cold and precise, because I knew exactly what this family had always been: takers, always taking, never giving. I carried Alara inside, the smell of smoke clinging to her hair, and I saw her tiny arm blistering. My stomach churned not only with fear, but rage. Rage at Kaylin, at my parents, at myself for believing family meant protection when it had only ever meant exploitation. Memories flashed. Every birthday I'd paid for, every loan I'd quietly covered, every dream I'd sacrificed while watching them live in luxury, and still I had been invisible, always invisible, until that jacket burned. I didn't just see my daughter's arm, I saw decades of myself being taken for granted. The humiliation of the party, the laughter of Kaylin's friends, the whispers of my cousins etched itself into my mind like fire on skin. But beneath the panic, beneath the rage, a quiet thought formed. If they thought this was the end of the story, if they thought my generosity was weakness, they were wrong. Every insult, every stolen dollar, every dismissive glance had been recorded in my mind, tucked away like evidence. And now it was time to stop being the family ATM. By the time the ambulance arrived, my hands smelled of smoke and paint, and I could barely hear the paramedics over my own heartbeat. Alara's cries had settled into shivers, her eyes wide with shock and pain. I glanced back through the window at the party still in full swing. Laughter, champagne, Kaylin's smirk, my mother chatting as if nothing had happened. My pulse thrummed in my temples. That moment, frozen in my memory, was the last thread of innocence I would let them touch. And I realized as the siren cut through the night that this wasn't just an accident, it was the spark, the first spark of a reckoning that would consume them all. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. Alara's small arm was bandaged, the burn worse than I first realized, and I sat beside her, trembling, my hands gripping hers like they were the only thing keeping me tethered to sanity. Every beep of the monitor made my heart jump. Every nurse's glance reminded me that my family had crossed a line I could never forgive. I kept replaying Kaylin's laughter over and over, the way he flung that jacket like it was trash, and a cold, bitter rage settled in my chest. This wasn't just a child's mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate cruelty, an exhibition of power and entitlement, and everyone had laughed. I looked at Alara, tears running down her little cheeks, and my resolve hardened. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let her grow up thinking family meant humiliation, that love was conditional, that your value depended on how much you could serve the greedy hands around you. She had poured 6 months of her life into that denim jacket, stitch by stitch, paint by paint, and it had burned in seconds, like everything I had sacrificed for this family. The realization hit me fully. My generosity, my silent endurance, my hidden labor for decades had all fed their arrogance. Once the nurses stabilized her, I pulled out my phone and started compiling everything. Bank statements, receipts, family trips I'd paid for, medical bills they'd ignored, rent I'd covered, car loans they took as gifts. Everything. I documented every detail with clinical precision. No emotion, no excuses. I was done being the invisible provider. I was done being the soft target of entitlement disguised as love. Every photo, every transaction, every dated note was a brick in the wall I was building, a wall that would protect me and Alara from ever being exploited again. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer. It felt strange, almost foreign, to take the steps that decades of obedience had never allowed, but the fire in me was relentless. I described the party, Kaylin's actions, my mother's passive approval, my father's indifferent shrug. I explained Alara's injury and the emotional trauma. The lawyer's eyes widened as I listed the years of financial abuse, the unpaid debts they had piled onto me, and the ongoing manipulations that had made me their personal ATM. She said, "This isn't just assault. This is systemic abuse. We can file a permanent restraining order and secure your assets. You're done being their ATM." I hung up with a mix of relief and disbelief. For the first time in decades, I felt like the scales might finally tip. My phone buzzed with messages from friends who had watched snippets of the party online, people I barely realized were allies. One text read, "We knew he was terrible, but this? We're so sorry. You and Alara don't deserve this." Support arrived in tiny bursts, comments, texts, offers to help pay medical bills, even tips on protecting my finances. I realized something crucial. My family's world was small, and it thrived on isolation. By stepping out of that sphere, I was already taking power back. Back at home, I began the meticulous work of freezing accounts, transferring property titles, and auditing every line of credit. Every action felt like a small, silent victory. I remembered every time my parents had pressured me to fund trips, pay tuition, cover emergencies that weren't mine, or bail Kaylin out of schemes that never affected me directly. I remembered every eye roll when I asked for acknowledgement, every sarcastic remark, every subtle dismissal. And now, armed with documentation and legal advice, I was ready to flip the script. Alara, slowly recovering, became my quiet partner in this revolution. She painted and stitched again, at first hesitantly, then with renewed determination. I could see the spark returning to her eyes, the same spark that had been crushed in front of that fire. "Mom," she whispered one night, tracing the edges of a new jacket she had designed, "I'm going to make something even better next time, something no one can destroy." Her resilience became fuel for my own. Every action I took to protect us felt validated, every step a reclamation of dignity stolen for years. The public humiliation of that party still haunted me. Kaylin had invited everyone we knew, family friends, co-workers, even distant cousins, all there to witness the power he wielded casually, all laughing as Alara screamed. I could replay the memory perfectly, the way he held the jacket like a trophy before tossing it, the fire reflecting in his eyes, the laughter of my parents, and the disbelief of Alara frozen mid-reach. But now I understood that humiliation only holds power if you allow it to define you, and I refused. Weeks passed, and the restraining order was filed. My lawyer had drafted it to cut off direct and indirect contact, including financial transactions, visits, and communications. Kaylin and my parents could not come near Alara or me, and any attempt to harass would lead to immediate legal consequences. Every notification of approval, every signed form, every certified letter felt like a hammer striking the chains I had lived under. I began to sleep easier at night, though the weight of decades of abuse still pressed on my chest. Then came the first unexpected ripple. Kaylin called my work, claiming some absurd grievance about money I supposedly owed him. I ignored it, letting my lawyer handle it. But it was clear he didn't know how to confront a woman who had stopped taking orders from him decades ago. My parents sent passive-aggressive emails, thinly veiled attempts to guilt me, but I blocked them all, a small smile curling on my lips each time I hit delete. The power was shifting. Every legal barrier, every precaution, every public record I secured made it clear this family no longer had access to me, and I no longer feared their judgments. But the strangest thing happened as I watched Alara recover. The fire that had terrified her had ignited something else. She began designing intricate pieces, documenting her progress, even sharing her work online. Her small Instagram page, once private, grew followers quietly, people who appreciated her art, her detail, her vision. And with each comment, each message of encouragement, I felt a profound satisfaction. This was more than healing, it was transformation. We were no longer victims, we were creators, defenders, architects of— And then came the knock on the door. A knock that wasn't supposed to be answered by anyone, yet there it was. The knock rattled my front door like a warning bell. I froze, glancing at Alara, who was perched on the couch with her latest paintings spread across the coffee table. Her eyes were wide, alert, but I didn't let panic win. This was a test of everything I'd learned, every measure, every precaution, every lesson in reclaiming control. I stepped cautiously toward the door, phone in hand, fingers hovering over 911, my pulse hammering. Whoever it wasn't supposed to be us. Not now, not ever again. Through the peephole, I saw Kalen. His smirk hadn't changed. Arrogance radiated from him in waves. Behind him, my mother hovered like a shadow, her lips tight, her posture forced into polite civility that I recognized instantly as manipulation. The familiar rage surged, but this time it was measured, strategic. I opened the door a crack, enough to speak through without letting them enter. "What do you want?" My voice was calm, but underneath, steel coiled. Kalen laughed, a low, smug sound that made my stomach twist. "Aveline," he said, as if nothing had happened, "I think we need to talk about the party, about Alara, about everything." My eyes narrowed. He thought he could waltz in and negotiate like I owed him something. "Talk from the driveway," I said evenly, "or not at all." My mother sighed, the sound heavy with feigned disappointment. "Honey, don't be like that. We just want to—" But I cut her off before she could finish. Years of rehearsed guilt trips and manipulation had trained me to recognize every tactic. No more. I had built walls, legal walls, financial walls, emotional walls. They wouldn't breach them. They started with small barbs, trying to poke at my emotions, to get me to respond. Kalen accused me of overreacting. My mother insinuated that Alara's burn was minor, nothing serious. Every word landed like a pebble on a steel plate. It bounced off harmlessly, but I watched them carefully, noting their behavior, their strategy, their assumptions that I'd fall back into old patterns. And then I made a decision. If they wanted confrontation, they would get it, but on my terms, in the arena I controlled. I spent the next days meticulously organizing everything. Evidence, photographs, messages, receipts, every proof of decades of financial abuse and neglect. I compiled it into a portfolio so damning it would leave no room for doubt. I contacted reporters, legal advisors, even a few influential acquaintances who had seen Kalen's entitled behavior at other events. Every interaction was calculated. Every step was designed to expose them publicly in a way that left no room for them to twist the narrative. Meanwhile, Alara thrived. She painted, stitched, and documented her art like a professional. Her small Instagram following ballooned into hundreds, then thousands, people admiring her talent, her resilience, her courage in the face of trauma. And I noticed something thrilling. Kalen's carefully constructed image of superiority and perfection began to crumble in public whispers and private messages. Friends and distant family started asking questions, subtly at first, then openly. They saw cracks in the facade, and for the first time, I realized that humiliation could be repurposed. I could turn the public shame they had inflicted on us back onto them. The first major confrontation happened at a small art showcase I organized for Alara, a quiet gallery opening in the city. Invitations went out only to trusted friends, supporters, and local media contacts. Kalen somehow found out and decided to attend, under the pretense of curiosity or concern. I watched him enter, confident and smug, as if the world would still bend to him. My heart beat fast, but my face remained calm. I let him see Alara's work, her proud smile, the patron's admiration. The juxtaposition was deliciously cruel, her brilliance on display, him powerless to undo it. I approached him slowly, letting each step draw attention. "Remember the jacket, Kalen?" I asked softly, loud enough for nearby attendees to hear. His smirk faltered. My voice carried authority and calm simultaneously. "The one you threw into the fire, the one that burned my daughter. We documented everything. Every insult, every financial manipulation, every humiliating party, every loan you never repaid. And now, everyone knows." Gasps floated through the gallery. Cameras subtly clicked. Phones discreetly recorded. Kalen's face went pale. His friends glanced nervously, some avoiding eye contact. My mother's posture stiffened, her smirk dissolving into irritation and panic. I didn't flinch. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind for weeks, imagining every expression, every rebuttal, every feeble attempt at charm. I stayed calm, letting the tension build, letting the room see the power shift. For the first time, decades of humiliation reversed themselves in real time. By the end of the evening, the gallery was buzzing. Alara received praise, inquiries for commissions, and heartfelt admiration. Kalen left quietly, his pride shattered, my mother trailing behind in a mix of fury and forced civility. I knew they would try to regroup, to strategize, to claw back whatever influence they thought they had over me, but every step they took would be documented, every move anticipated. The public humiliation that had been my daughter's nightmare had become our weapon. Weeks passed and legal proceedings began. Restraining orders were enforced, lawsuits quietly filed for past financial abuses, and my family's attempts to interfere were blocked at every turn. I watched them flail in private messages, social media attempts, and indirect inquiries. Kalen's arrogance finally met boundaries he could not cross. Alara's confidence soared in tandem with my own. Each day she painted and stitched more boldly, and the public attention reinforced the truth we already knew. We were survivors, creators, and conquerors of our own destiny. And yet, just as I began to feel invincible, I received an anonymous message, a photo of the denim jacket, charred but intact, with a note scribbled in familiar handwriting. "You think this ends here. You haven't seen the worst yet." The photo of the charred jacket sat on my phone like a challenge. My stomach knotted, but my hands were steady. Kalen's message wasn't a threat I hadn't anticipated. It was predictable, almost childish. I had spent weeks preparing for every eventuality, legal, financial, emotional. I wasn't afraid anymore. I understood something fundamental. Power wasn't taken by anger. It was taken by strategy, patience, and decisiveness. I brought Alara into the plan, explaining the situation in terms she could understand. "They're trying to scare us," I said, showing her the image, "but we have the proof, we know the truth, and this time we control the story." Her small face was set with determination, her hands already reaching for a sketch pad, ready to transform fear into creation. Watching her, I felt an overwhelming mix of pride and relief. She wasn't just my daughter anymore, she was my partner in reclaiming our lives. The next confrontation was inevitable. Kalen tried subtle harassment, emails, messages, even indirect friends showing up at my art shows, but every attempt was blocked, every interaction documented. My lawyer handled every misstep with precision. By the time Kalen realized that the restraining order and legal documents weren't mere suggestions, he was already trapped in a web he could not escape. My parents, too, faced consequences, frozen accounts, public exposure of their manipulations, and a community beginning to see them for what they were. I watched one moment vividly. A family friend, someone who had quietly known about Kaylin's cruelty for years, came forward at one of Alara's exhibitions. They handed me an envelope of receipts, notes, and recordings my family had assumed were irrelevant. Every hidden act of financial abuse, every humiliating comment over the years, it was all there, cataloged, undeniable. Kaylin's smirk, my mother's forced politeness, my father's indifference, they all unraveled in the face of facts. Alara's art began to gain real recognition. Her designs were featured in local galleries, sold online, and praised by critics. She had taken the pain of that night and turned it into something lasting, tangible, and beautiful. Every stitch, every brushstroke became a symbol of resilience. Watching her thrive publicly was sweeter than any revenge I could have imagined. This was justice that didn't rely on anger. It relied on creativity, persistence, and undeniable truth. One quiet evening we sat on the porch, the city lights glowing softly in the distance. Alara leaned against me, her latest creation on her lap. "Mom," she said, "I'm not scared anymore. Not of them, not of anyone." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything we'd endured. I pulled her close, feeling a profound release. For the first time, I wasn't just protecting her, I was sharing life with her in a world we had built ourselves, one free from manipulation, fear, and entitlement. Finally, I took a quiet moment alone in my home, looking around at the space we had claimed as ours. No hidden debts, no looming threats, no family members attempting to control us. Just Alara, me, and a life we had built with our own hands, our own sweat, and our own courage. I smiled, whispered to myself, and knew that this declaration was true. The ATM was permanently out of service. We had survived fire, ridicule, and manipulation, and now, for the first time, we thrived. Alara's laughter filled the home, her art brightened the walls, and the weight of decades lifted from my shoulders. The family that had once held us captive in entitlement and humiliation was powerless to touch us. We were free. We were strong. We were finally ours. And as the sun rose the next morning, warm light spilling over our reclaimed lives, I realized something even more powerful. Freedom tastes sweeter than revenge, and the legacy we leave isn't one of humiliation, it's one of unshakable resilience, creativity, and love.